Okay, I know everybody is still coming in, so we're going to talk real quick about something that's going to happen at the next meeting. So this falls into the category of what have I done for you lately? And the answer is, Dora reached out to me and said that they are doing a sunset review of the medical marijuana regulations, the recreational marijuana regulations, and the Medical Practices Act. And I was like, oh, do I have so much to say about this. So, this is what Dora sent me about their sunset review, and that this is what they're reviewing is the retail marijuana code, the medical marijuana code, and the medical marijuana program administered by the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. We are reaching out to groups like Cannabis Motion Colorado to determine whether the program should be continued and what kind of changes, if any, should be made. I'm hoping you will all tell me more things you would like to see changed, but for now, here's my list of consternations. And I'm sorry about these slides, I just threw them together real quick. So, number one, contradictory laws and practices between the MED, CDPHE, the Colorado State Legislature, the Colorado State Constitution, the Colorado Criminal Code, and of course, the Medical Practice Act. Is there any chance for us to have one set of rules? My perfect future involves someone walking into a dispensary, and it's one dispensary. And if they have a medical card, they can buy more, they can buy greater potency, and they don't have to pay the taxes. And if they only have an ID and are over 21, they can buy rec. And you don't have all this stupid, if you own a med and rec dispensary, you have to have a separate joint rolling machine on the med side than you do from the rec side, because you're not allowed to wheel that piece of equipment across the hall to the other side. So I think it would save a lot of problems if we had one law that covered everything. Obviously, we need to reconcile a few things, such as the ridiculous equivalency rule that's on the recreational side right now that says an ounce of marijuana equals 8.5 grams of flower, which makes sense mathematically at 30% THC if you do the math. But then if you take that same 8.5 grams of concentrate, which is about 8,500 milligrams, and if you want to make edibles out of it, you have to throw 90% of those edibles away, because that same 1 ounce of marijuana flower equals only 800 milligrams of edibles, because you're a terrible cook. Someone who doesn't know math set this law, but obviously we can't have that in place for our medical patients, because what if they need to buy, you know, RSO or something like that? It's really, we'll get that figured out. I am still working on that one, but we're getting there. Anyway, so that's my perfect future, is a single comprehensive law, and obviously none of this will happen until 2019. Another problem we have is the transfer of the caregiver registry out of CDPHE into the MED in late 2016, early 2017. This is a problem for me on the Western Slope much more than it is a problem for you here. When we did a survey of our patients in 2016 in preparation for the online medical marijuana registry, we found that 88% of our patients in Denver had internet access and a smartphone. 90% of our patients in Vail had internet access and a smartphone, but as soon as you drove west of Vail, it was the numbers went straight downhill. Our average patient at our clinic is 51 years old, and the number of patients on the Western Slope, meaning Montrose, Grand Junction, Delta County, that have internet access and a smartphone is only 56%. It's 56% out there. We have a lot of places with no internet access whatsoever there. And because there is no paper registry for caregivers, we have a situation now, we just had one last week, where I made the Department of Health call this 90-year-old man so that he could register as a caregiver for his 88-year-old wife, because he's never going to be able to use a computer. So that's the sort of things that we're dealing with on the Western Slope, that, you know, it's a little better in Denver. But at any rate, that's another thing I'd like to see reconciled. As all of us know, we've had rather poor implementation of the online medical marijuana registry. As anyone who has a patient who applied by mail last year and wants to go online this year and found that the state very unhopefully typed in all the by mail applications last year into the online registry. So now as soon as they make an account, it says their social security number is already in use, and unless they request access to an account they had no idea existed, they cannot register online. So it's been a joyous year working with that, needless to say. And once again, the system in rural areas simply forces patients back to the black market, which was the whole point of the legal marijuana system, was that the black market would suddenly become a white market. And then last but not least, scare tactics, loss of medical license, and burdensome regulation systems for physicians writing recommendations. Obviously, that's my biggest issue for this group. In light of that, terrible slides, but what we have right now is a double standard. We have 4 members of our group that I could name right now, but I won't, who have either voluntarily turned in their licenses or have their licenses stripped because they admitted to using marijuana, even though it is legal for adults in the state of Colorado. Right now we have a double standard where marijuana is legal for recreational use if you're over the age of 21, legal for medical use if you're over the age of 18, unless you hold a medical license. If you're a nurse, a PA, a physician, something like that, and you ever test positive for marijuana, you have violated the Medical Practices Act, the Nursing Practices Act, or the Pharmacy Practices Act. So, hopefully, this is the first thing I've told Dora, and they are actually coming to our next meeting, so we'll be able to talk to them directly about issues like this. So everyone gets homework. You get to decide what your issues for Dora are, so that you're ready to present them next month when they come to our meeting to ask for input on this sunsetting. So what I've done right now, and what I emailed to Dora, is the sections of the Medical Practices Act and how they conflict with the state constitution, and I have suggested language for reconciling this so that you will not lose your license just because you smoked or joined at a party last week and someone saw you there. And so that doctors can once again return to having medical cards if they need to use it medically and not be ostracized for this restricting their license. And maybe we'll get a couple people their licenses back too, who knows. Anyway, this is kind of boring. But this is more. Here's the Colorado Constitution. Here's where it conflicts with this section of the Medical Practices Act. Here's where the Medical Practices Act refers to the Colorado state, the criminal justice system, and refers into the federal DEA system. And what I've got then is suggested language for how we can reconcile this. And maybe we'll have a win. So anyway, that's what's coming up at our next meeting. I know you're all overjoyed. Sounds thrilling. And now, with that done, you're going to have a word from our sponsor tonight, which is ebbu.
I'd just like to add, I lost my license. I'm the president of the second case in the United States. They found out I had a cannabis card. I'm a doctor, and I lost my license 3 years ago. And hopefully this will be reversed.
Yeah, I've got a nurse in Montrose who lost her license in 2015. So recreational marijuana was already there. She was up for promotion. She had a cheek swab drug test. They said she had the choice of going to rehab or losing her license, even though she had a medical marijuana card. So, yes?
I understand that there was a nurse that was wheelchair bound that lost his license too, because he was using, this has been several years back, but.
If we can get this worded the way that we want, we might have a win for all physicians in Colorado and all nurses in Colorado. It wouldn't happen until 2019, but it is possible, and we need everyone's support to move this forward. So once again, homework, get out there and tell me what you think else we should do on this.
Is the insurance agency fighting this sort of thing? Right?
This is simply no one ever adjusted the Medical Practices Act. No one ever adjusted the Nursing Practices Act when we legalized medical marijuana. No one adjusted when we legalized recreational marijuana. This is simply nobody's put it all together. So if we have a chance to do that, we should, because it would benefit all of us. So
Thank you.
this is your slide advancer. I'm going to slideshow. All right.
Thanks.
Take it away. You can read over here.
Okay. My name is John Martin. I work for ebbu LLC, and we're new members of CCC, and Martha invited us to introduce ourselves. And when I say we, I'm not the only person that attends the meetings usually. I have a colleague named Kimless, who's not out, or who's out of town tonight, and our CSU Brian Reed also couldn't attend, so I'm here solo. So ebbu, we formulate cannabis products using purified cannabinoids and terpenes. And I wanted to offer a bit of an overview so you understand how we go about doing that and what some of our emphases are. And it's a pretty short talk, it's just a handful of slides, and then I was going to just transition to question and answer and discussion for those of you who are interested. So in joining CCC, it seemed like an appropriate step for us because we engage in research related to cannabis with a view towards developing products for therapeutic purposes. And one of the reasons we'd like to join CCC is to discuss collaborations that can help ebbu develop formulations and routes of administration. But we also wanted to hear practitioner perspectives and preferences with regard to cannabis product attributes, and then to share and make intellectual contributions to CCC, given our perspective and what we're up to. So this is a little bit of a dated picture, but these are some of the people who I work with. I'm there, and Sean in the back is one of our chemists and operations persons. Martin is on the right, has gone back to Sweden, but he's one of the chemists that helped set up our post-scale chromatography instrument, got some of the methodology started. Kurt Lee is in chemistry, and Kyle works on routes of administration and process. Mark Wyndham on the back, he is a process chemist that has actually left ebbu, but he did have some nice impacts while he was with us. And then, as I mentioned before, Brian Reed, our CSO, and Rob is somebody I probably won't talk about much today. He works in the plant genetics side of ebbu, doing some pretty interesting things. But I put his contact information in on the last slide if you're interested in reaching out to him with any questions or asking me questions around genetics if you're particularly interested. And then last is Isidro Susano, who's on the cellular pharmacology side, person I have a great deal of respect for. Great lab scientist. So who you don't see is Caitlin and Andrea and Darla and several other scientists who comprise about 50% of the company in terms of number of people. ebbu was established in 2014 and it's based in Evergreen, Colorado. We're in the business of trying to discover formulations of cannabinoids and terpenes with a view toward producing consistent, predictable effects from using those products. There has been an emphasis on adult use, mood effect type formulations. We're not just in the medicinal side, we're also on the adult use side. And also we can do routes of administration development, like one product I'll describe here today, the beverage soluble product, but also other routes like topicals and mouth melts and such. And our business is structured toward IP development and technology licensing. So we have a lot of patents pending at the USPTO. The number is now 40 to 50. And for a while there, it was representing a pretty significant size of the space in terms of cannabis at the USPTO. Our first formulated product that we developed called Genesis, some pretty basic wellness-oriented formulations are currently produced by a licensee in Colorado, so we no longer produce products for the marketplace, although we were for a while. And we made some news recently with the announcement of a collaboration with the creator of Blue Moon. The company is called Syria, and Keith wants to produce a non-alcoholic beer that's infused with cannabinoids. This is on the adult use side.
So if it's non-alcoholic beer, is it like barley soda?
So it's using a brewing method where you brew and then you remove alcohol at a very late step, and then you would infuse with cannabis. I understand it's a German methodology, but I'm not familiar with the technical side.
Yeah, it's known as adjunct brewing.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting story on the adult use side. So it's important to emphasize that at ebbu we're not using one type of science, we're using several at the same time in a multidisciplinary collaborative approach to accomplish our goals. We're almost trying to attack cannabis on a lot of different fronts at the same time, and it's actually a very satisfying aspect of working at ebbu because we're constantly exchanging information and success one to the next person. Success in genetics can positively impact the source of rare cannabinoids for formulations development. Formulations development success will help to prioritize and emphasize the importance of genetics development, etc. So this is a satisfying side. So we definitely refer to the scientific literature as much as possible, but the scientific literature is somewhat limited with regard to polypharmacology involving a lot of rare cannabinoids that we have access to. So we use, is there a laser pointer on here? Is there just the big button?
Yeah.
Cool. So, thanks. As I was referring to a minute ago, we use process and separations, and I'll describe in a minute in a little more detail, to extract cannabinoids from the plant material and separate them one from another. And we can use our chemistry methodology to monitor the status of our separation, the composition of the mixtures that we prepare. Chemistry is also links to success on developing routes of administration. I'll touch on that a little bit more later too. We use cellular pharmacology, so Brian, CSO, heads up this side of ebbu specifically. So cellular pharmacology, what's done at ebbu is cultures of cells are exposed to mixtures of cannabinoids and terpenes in a multi-well plate format. I don't know how familiar you are with high throughput functional assays, but essentially the cells are expressing a given receptor, a human receptor of choice. And when we expose them to mixtures of cannabinoids and terpenes, we can monitor the activity of the receptor in culture. And so it may be that a handful of terpenes and cannabinoids bump the activity of the cannabinoid receptor 5-fold over THC itself. That would be discovery. Or drop it down to 0 or hamper the activity. That would be a discovery as well. But you can pick a lot of other receptors, serotonin receptors, pain receptors of various types, to look at and understand how mixing these cannabinoids and terpenes are impacting them. And those can raise hypotheses to efforts to measure the effect in clinical models or in humans. So there's the clinical pharmacology side, which to date has largely been limited to observational type marketing type studies that are really emphasizing subjective effects, subjective response to formulations as they are prototyped as ready for market cannabis products. So as of yet, ebbu's not engaged in more highly sophisticated clinical research yet. So this is Martin. I mentioned him in a previous slide. He's standing inside of our prep scale instrument. Zeus is the name we gave it. I guess my geeky scientist always give very expensive instruments, names like that. So Zeus, this column here is an important component of Zeus. So this is a line that you can direct eluting cannabinoids that are coming across the instrument under chromatographic conditions or treatment or handling. They elute off, and you can specify that whatever's coming off the instrument will be put into a vessel, a carboy in this case. And so Zeus is a special instrument because it includes 18 lines. So prep scale chromatography in the pharma environment is sometimes dedicated to purifying or maybe just cleaning up a single molecule for a drug. But since we're working with cannabis, which has a lot of compounds in it, a lot of cannabinoids, some of them pretty well known and a lot not well known, we need a capability to pull apart compounds one from another in a sort of a parallel fashion in a high throughput way, so we can get our highly purified stocks of these various cannabinoids to work with. So okay, I should back up a second. So we're extracting cannabinoids from the plant material to ethanol, and then we develop a feedstock that goes into Zeus and is pushed through a column. And as the cannabinoids migrate at differential rates through the column, those that elute early can be jettisoned into vessel 1, for example, vessel 2, vessel 3, vessel 4, and you can end up with purified stocks of a rare cannabinoid like CCC in vessel 2, and THCV in vessel 7. And then you have a highly purified rare cannabinoid, and you can formulate cannabis. Let's say you want to make a THC product with 25% THC, but you want 37% THCV and 24% CBGV. this provides you the starting material to produce that mixture, which is not as capable or producible given the plant material that's readily available and marketed. Sorry, that was a long slide. Didn't mean for that to go as long. So this is the Cellular POLY-Pharmacology lab. I emphasize poly because it really is an effort geared toward teasing apart and understanding the impacts of complex mixtures and their impact on receptors, and less so THC alone, where a lot of the research literature actually is sort of limited to or reports on. So, when people talk about the polypharmacology of cannabis, there, often is a discussion around this notion of the entourage effect, the synergistic type of effect. I don't have results here, but we agree with that.
How are you doing this? You turned in your licenses.
Turn our licenses?
Did you say you turned in your license? Or
No.
did I mishear you?
No, I didn't say that, but it's true, we did. So, we have licensees that collaborate with us. So when we want to touch THC, we work with them. But we work with hemp still. So hemp produces THC in small quantities. If you commit to hemp research, you can't work with as much of it, obviously. But it doesn't mean you can't work with pretty much every other cannabinoid that's there. There are a lot of important cannabinoids besides THC. So I mentioned a beverage soluble product before. So Kurt Levy was working with means to solubilize cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are notoriously insoluble in aqueous solutions. Get them in at very, very small quantities. So he was able to get them in at a lot higher concentration. And what he found is that when you get them in, get them soluble in this way, in liquid, this is largely water-based mixture, that the onset was suddenly much faster than one would expect for a typical edible. And even the effect that one would feel from a pretty minute mass of cannabinoids is pretty significant. So, Syria Beverages is certainly interested in this technology for infusing beer with cannabis. It's an enabling technology. And another thing that's nice about it, and I thought persons like yourself would appreciate, is that it renders a formulation or a cannabis product dosable. So aside from being able to control what the formulation is made of, so you have a great deal of control there as a prescriber, practitioner. You can specify how much a person takes, how frequently, and I think it starts to look a lot more like a medication that gives you some of those sort of minute control, levers, knobs, over what you're prescribing. And I know persons in this, I presume persons in this audience are. That's okay.
Hey, Deb, it'll be just a minute. Carry on.
I'm almost done.
Good.
Sorry for taking more time than I expected.
Hey, Deb, hang on just a minute. Our sponsor's just finishing up, and you can watch along. Sure. No. Oops. There we are. Okay. Continue.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so, so it has some nice attributes that are useful for companies, persons who are interested in consumer products, and they want, formulation consistency, and they want it to be a known quantity, and they don't want the onset to be kind of an unknown, broad range, very late, maybe not a very good safety profile for consumption for persons who are not experienced using cannabis. So this type of tech helps to address a lot of those issues. And it's a valuable route of administration for a growing list of formulations. So we can input it there.
Are you looking at doing any pharmacokinetic testing on that to see what the uptake rate is compared
Yeah,
to
we
traditional
definitely
level?
need to. Yes, absolutely. So it's not something we've done, but yes. So we're into some discussions about getting at that.
Well, maybe someday the group will be able to offer this service.
Yeah, that's part of what we were hoping to get by intermingling with CCC members, is to try and identify these resources and put people together. So yes, that's a hope for us. Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk offline about that, because we do, through the group, obviously, have access to the medical team, we would need for that. All of us have patients who might be willing to participate, and then we have CU, we have a rate set for blood tests with them.
Okay, yeah, I mean, part of this too is to get to acquaint you with us and, to put that together. So thank you. That's it. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. These are some contact information for myself and for some of the other persons involved in the scientific disciplines at ebbu. Mentioning Rob Rostow, genetics person, so didn't touch on that very much, but it's interesting.
Any questions for ebbu labs? No?
Is the 15-minute onset only for liquids?
That's what I'm referring to with that number. So you're talking about infusing other products?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he would have to be tested. We've tested some foods, and it was also rapid. I don't have numbers because that was a bit more anecdotal. I was like, oh yeah, how quick was it? But it wasn't measured as rigorously. Topicals remains to be seen. That's in development, so we're going to have numbers on that soon. There's some anecdotal evidence that it does get in. How much we have to dose, how quickly, those things need to be measured and worked out. But outlook good on that front.
Is it possible to ever determine how long it lasts in the system? How far?
Yeah, I mean, certainly doing the more sophisticated clinical studies, blood draws and assays of that sort, I think are key. We've been, like I was saying, we've been doing subjective measurements, so perceptible effects, which, has its value. I think some people would poo-poo some of that, but
I'm wondering, is it possible to shorten the time frame or lengthen it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge about how to control the delivery of compounds over time, slow release, or maybe to impact bioavailability by using alternate formulations. I think that's really possible. I'm just sharing a bit of what we can show you right now based on some things that are in our hands. So, yeah.
A quick question.
Yeah.
Anybody here, are you or anybody from ebbu going to the ICRS later this month?
I'm going. Yeah, I'll present a poster there on mood effects.
Mood?
Mood effect. So this is an adult use scenario: relaxation, euphoria, stimulation from formulations of cannabinoids and terpenes in a vapor administration. I'm going to be the only one this year. Caitlin couldn't go. Brian presented at ACS. I think he let ICRS go. But yeah, I'll be there. If you're going to be there, let's.
Is there anybody else?
Where is it?
Leiden, Holland.
Okay.
Next year, the National Institutes for Health is co-hosting it. It's going to be in Bethesda, Maryland, which is a real breakthrough.
That's great, yeah, that is.
Very significant.
But let's thank our sponsors. We have one quick announcement from Ron Herring, and then we will get to our main speaker.
Okay, so there's a researcher at CSU Pueblo with the Institute of Cannabinoid Research. Her name is Barbara Brett-Green. She's currently recruiting for an epilepsy study. I brought some flyers, so if you guys have any patients who you might think want to qualify or participate, there is a cash stipend. They can get some money. There's some other rewards. They get to keep an iPad that they're going to use to chart during the study. So yeah, just check out the flyer if there's anybody who you think might want to join or could benefit. Thanks, guys.
And where are the flyers going to be on the food table on the way out?
They're right here, right now. I can put them wherever you guys want them.
Is that for all ages?
18 and up.
18 and up?
18 and up, okay.
And
So
the
don't leave
criteria
that
is all on the
there.
flyer.
And just another study, Sioux Sisley, and then I want to talk to you about this. Sioux Sisley is recruiting people for PTSD study nationally. So Sioux Sisley at AOL.com and mention Paul Brecken, and then you're on your way with regarding to refer any patients for her study.
Now, does hers require cannabis naive patients?
What?
Doesn't Sioux Sisley's study require cannabis naive patients, or they have to quit
I don't
using
know.
cannabis?
I'm saying that
Okay.
this is somebody who you can contact and ask those questions, and she'll take good care of it.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. All right, Deb, you ready?
Hi,
Deb,
everybody. Yep. I'm
are you ready? Okay, so hit share and we can see your slides.
How's that look?
Hold on, I'm in the way. No, you have me up in front of your slides. No, that's still not. There we go. Now we got it. Okay, now you are in the corner, your slides are on the screen. May I introduce Dr. Debra Kimless of the Forward Grow project out of both Maryland and Pennsylvania. I'm going to let her speak for herself. Thanks, Deb, for joining us.
And thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's 9 o'clock on the East Coast, which means it's like an hour beyond my bedtime. So, and John, if you're still there, I say hi. He's Ed, and hope to get back together again soon. I love your stuff. So I actually met Lucky in the ICS conference in Colorado, and we got to talking about a whole host of things, including microdose. I am an anesthesiologist and pain medicine specialist by training. I started delving into understanding cannabis since 2013, and I started treating patients using a microdose. She was intrigued and said, let's talk about it at this lecture, so thank you. Okay, so when I first started looking at this as a lecture, I said, gosh, I wonder what, the official term for microdose is, because for me, microdose is really a term of art. It doesn't mean 10 to the minus 6. So when I first started looking at it, I saw a definition that said it's a technique for studying the behavior of drugs in humans through an administration of doses so low, and then they write subtherapeutic, that are unlikely to produce whole body effects, but high enough to allow the cellular response to be studied. So it doesn't really sound subtherapeutic, it sounds therapeutic because there is a response, albeit a cellular response. So I didn't really care for that definition. And then I found an article from 2010 about microdosing, and they define a microdose to be 1 prick of the expected pharmacological dose. And I started thinking about, gosh, if we were using Rick Simpson oil, if you had a gram of that, and it was 60 to 90% THC, that means if you were, if it were to make Simpson oil, it'd be something like 6 to 9 milligrams of THC. So that, I think, starts framing an understanding of a microdose. And then I started researching about what other drugs are microdosed. And so there's actually quite an extensive list, and there's a new book out by Michael Pollan, who actually tried all of these. And so if you want, you can learn about his experiences. But LSD, psilocybin, DMT, which is the psychoactive component of ayahuasca, ketamine. And the interesting things about this is that at teeny tiny doses, there are people that are being treated with for PTSD, for pain, for anxiety, for depression, and it's really very interesting. And I think this is something that we're going to read about a lot more. But tonight we're going to just talk about cannabis and microdosing cannabis. So I like this picture. So I started thinking about what a microdose for cannabis should be. And in 2013, nobody really was speaking. I started thinking about the endocannabinoid system as a thought experiment. And I started thinking that we all know the definitions, that the endocannabinoid system makes endocannabinoids on demand, It's used locally, it's broken down immediately, and not stored. And we know that phytocannabinoids, if taken internally, is used systemically. They sit on receptors, it is stored, and because it's stored in fat, it sort of acts like a depot for slow release. And so I was thinking, if that's the case where exogenous cannabinoids act as its own depot, why would we need grams worth of phytocannabinoids to help our bodies? So I started thinking about the dose response curve, and if you look, it depends on where you are and which curve you are, but back in the recreational days, maybe people start on the red curve where they can find themselves using more and more and more, but in this dose response thought, maybe the top or the most response that you get on the curves to the right are not as great as the blue curve or even the green curve. However, when you speak to people, when they initially start cannabinoids, they have this sort of linear experience that's dose related. So the bigger the dose, the greater the response. And I think that's pretty universal in thought. But the question is, where on this dose response curve are you? I mean, you could be at the top part where the black squares are, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, where a little bit more, you can start falling off that curve and actually not having any response or actually having lesser response. And so I started looking at the research as best as we can find, and in 2006, Debra in her lab decided to look at different cancer cell lines, and then she threw them out on petri dishes, and then she wanted to discover the IC50, which is the inhibitory concentration where 50% of the cancer cells don't replicate. And then she looked at the different cannabinoid molecules as well as THC-rich and CBD-rich. And then she reported it in a not very convenient unit of measure in micromoles. And so when you apply Avogadro's equation and figure out what these numbers mean in milligrams, it ends up being a really small amount, and we'll get to that in a sec. In addition, you have to understand about the modes of administration of your patient when you're discussing this microdose opportunity because of bioavailability. So when you give somebody something intravenously, they say 100%. Inhalation for cannabis, they say plus or minus 50%. I think that's a little low, probably more towards 70 or 80%, but this is what I'm reading. Sublingual dosage forms, they say plus or minus 25%. I still think that's a little low. And in oral ingestion, plus or minus 8%. So say, for example, you want to give somebody 10 milligrams of THC. If you give it to them by swallowing, they're probably only getting about 8% of that chemical compound. So if you're trying to make a recommendation and guide these patients as to how they're going to microdose, if they microdose something sublingually and then they microdose that same substance and swallow it, clearly they're going to have a very different dose-response relationship. So this is a pretty important concept. And then I started looking to see if any of our peers subscribe to this, because at the current time in 2013 and 2014, I think I was the only one, or at least the only one that was sort of reporting on it using microdose. And thankfully, Dustin Solak came to save the day that I was not the only person out there. And he oftentimes recommends people, especially when they are seemingly on accelerated doses, to stop cannabis ingestion for 2 days, and then on the third day, start using milligrams at a time. And he increases the doses until patients start feeling some type of a physical or mental effect, and sometimes he even pushes it a little bit higher, just to sort of see what that range could be, and then patients can back it off or not. So for me, a microdose is less than 1 to 2 milligrams of total cannabinoid, and I have this is a slide that I share with patients and physicians where people are like, well, how does one calculate that? And so if you have a joint and it's a gram, 1,000 milligrams, and if something is 20% THC, one would assume that, THCA, one would assume that it would be a 200 milligram dose of THCA in that single joint. And you figure that you lose a lot from side stream smoke and just burning and ash. And if somebody were to consume it by themselves, they'd probably end up getting 60 to 80 milligrams. So you can see that a microdose of less than 2 milligrams is really a small amount. And so the medicine that I had access to help guide patients with had a cannabinoid profile that looked like this. So approximately half of it was in its raw form, or its acid form. Half is it's in its decarboxylated state. It had a natural ratio of THC or THCA to CBD or CBDA, almost a 10 to 1. And when you add up all the other constituents of the minor cannabinoids, it ended up being about 1.17 milligrams. And the reason why I'm specifying this is that I'm going to share with you some case studies, and I wanted you to have an understanding as to what these patients were receiving. All of these patients were receiving the same medication. This is in a sublingual oil-extracted dosage form. And the other piece of it is I did change everybody's diet to a whole food plant-only diet. I check their pH, have them check their morning urine pHs, make sure that they're 7 or greater, and this is what we're doing. So we're going to talk about a couple of patients. I have 2 prostate cancer patients as examples. So the first is a 72-year-old man who came to me with recurrent prostate cancer. He came to me in 2016. He was diagnosed in 2011. He had a Gleason score of 8 and a PSA of 7.2. He was treated with hormone deprivation, seed implant, and multiple sessions of radiation. At that time, his PSA level dropped to a 0.3, and he was stable until 2015 when his PSA began to rise above 1.0. And actually, in 2016 he saw me. So in August 2016, his level was 7.8, and his biopsy revealed recurrence of his cancer with no metastasis. So he started on first of 3 Lupron injections, and after the first injection, his PSA remained at 7.8, and that's when he came and he met with me. We changed his diet. We started him on a low dose of cannabis oil. I administered it at 1 ml at a time, and I told you the 1 ml was that profile that I shared with you. And so this is an example. So the first blue column is the first Lupron injection, and his PSA did not deviate from the 7.8. The second month, and this is time of months, we gave him the low-dose cannabis oil, which was 1 ml sublingual 4 times a day, and his PSA dropped to 4.6. The third month, we continued the oil. He had his third Lupron injection. His PSA went to 0.3. Fourth month, no more Lupron. It continued at 0.3. Fifth month, 0.3. 2 years later, so he currently has a PSA of less than 0.2. Second patient is an 81-year-old who's otherwise healthy man with a history of metastatic prostate cancer, treated with seed implants, radiation, and again, Lupron injections. And I always ask patients what their goals are and what their benchmarks are. For the last patient, the benchmark was the PSA level. For this gentleman, his doctors were following escalating doses of testosterone. Because he was failing all of these different modalities, the last modality was to have surgery to do an orchiectomy, which was something he was not looking forward to. And so we changed his diet, started him on low-dose cannabis oil, and for him, we titrated him up to 5 times a day. And this is a timeline of weeks. So we started out at a testosterone level of 1350. The second, in 2 weeks, we treated him, it went down to 850, he went to a surgeon, he said, Doc, I just had a drop in my testosterone level from 1350 to 850. The surgeon said that's amazing, however, it's still way too high. He said, give me 2 more weeks. In 2 more weeks, so in 1 month, he went from 1350 to a level that was less than what they would have expected after an orchiectomy. In week 6, it stayed, and 2 years later, it's still down. And there are studies that show that cannabis does work for prostate cancer, brain cancer. So one of my first patients was an 8-year-old girl with a history of acute lymphocytic leukemia. She failed multiple chemotherapy and radiation trials. She was subjected to a bone marrow transplant that worked for a month or 2 and then failed. And when we got to see her, she was in hospice. And her parents explained that she was chronically nauseated, she had no appetite, she had headaches, she looked swollen, she had no energy. And in fact, when we saw her, she was literally laying on a couch, vacant eyes, looking swollen, non-communicative. And understandably so, the only medications at the time she was taking was methadone and morphine in divided doses. And so her goal, and this is her MRI, the goal was for her to hopefully have a better quality of life before she died. And so they wanted to titrate her and reduce and/or replace her opiates with cannabis to just improve her quality of life. And so you can see here she had a leptomeningeal spread of her ALL, and you can see even her ventricles were involved. And so we started her on 1 ml of oil 4 times a day sublingually, and again changed her diet. And so initially we reduced and then replaced all of her narcotics in a month. She became more active, and I like to say that she was just displaying appropriate demeanor. And for any of you out there that have children, that means that she was talking back, refusing to take a bath, and I believe eye rolling was involved. You know, suggested that this was not the behavior of a dying child, and insisted on a repeat MRI. And that's a side by side, and this is in 2 months. And the interesting thing was, she was not having any other chemotherapy, she didn't have radiation, literally was methadone and morphine and the cannabis and the diet change. And again, there are lots of studies that show that cannabis can be very useful in patients with brain cancer. Second patient is a 69-year-old man who woke up post-dental in the emergency room. Upon workup, an MRI revealed a tumor. Biopsy diagnosed him as having a glioblastoma. His chief complaints were extreme fatigue, inability to perform his ADLs without assistant, and a lot of cognitive changes. His wife was 5'2", and he was 6'3", and so she was having a lot of trouble. Somebody contacted me regarding this man. We changed his diet and started him on a low-dose cannabis oil treatment. This was the only medicine that he was taking. He was otherwise completely healthy. And you can see the glioblastoma is in a really bad spot, so it was not amenable to surgery. And the biopsy revealed that it was not really a chemotherapy candidate because it was Timidor resistant. And so he was scheduled to have an appointment with a radiation oncologist. But for some reason, somebody ordered another MRI 2 weeks after we changed his diet and started him on his cannabis oil. And that was 2 weeks later. And the radiologist read this x-ray as central cystic degeneration, clearly responding to radiation therapy. However, he didn't even have an appointment yet with the radiation. And And this was 9 months later. And sadly, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor when I move it around?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. So sadly, a year later, he was going to the bathroom, he slipped on a rug, hit his head, bled into his head, and died. And upon autopsy, this tumor was even smaller. I mean, it was such a fluky, weird thing.
Yeah.
And again, lots of studies with glioblastomas and cannabis. So I actually had the fortune of giving a lecture at the Dougherty Lab in King's College, England, to Patrick Dougherty, who actually described DHEL, which is the enzyme that creates 2-AG. And he brought me in to share a bunch of case studies because he wanted his bench top researchers to understand the importance of the work they were doing. And so while I was discussing this, he kept saying, why are you calling this a microdose? Why isn't it just called a dose? And so I'm like, you're right. So with that, that's our greenhouse in Maryland, where we do a lot of research and a lot of growing, 700 pounds a month. And I open up to any questions you have. And be kind.
For questions, can we have you come down here so that she can see you? I know there's questions. Come on, people, put your hand up. Ebony?
I just want to know, I'm actually going to Maryland next month. Can I actually come visit the grow by chance? I don't know what the regulations are.
Our CCC research assistant, Ebony Miller, is coming to Maryland next month, and she wants to know if she can visit your facility.
So Ebony, see my email? Please contact me and let's make an arrangement.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you asked a question. What can you say about maintenance dose?
What can you say about maintenance doses?
For something that's working already at a higher
Right.
dose?
So I am really nervous about what to do because we don't have the ability to draw blood and look at PKs and what's available in patients. So I hold them as steady state, literally for a year, and see how they do again, following whatever benchmarks they have. And then if they're sick and tired of taking this 4 times a day because it's a pain, then I reduce it by an ml, and then reduce it by another ml, continuing to follow benchmarks. And if they stay stable, I keep it at half dose. And that's based on nothing other than a feeling. I have over 350 patients. These patients I shared because I had grafts and x-rays of, but I have lung cancer patients, breast cancer patients, and they're all experiencing similar things. And I can put on maintenance dose and half dose after a year.
Your next question is going to come talk to you directly.
Hi, nice to see you. A couple of questions I have. You talked about microdosing, you talked about cannabinoids, but you didn't talk about treating different cancers that may respond better to CBD versus THC, THCA, or whatever. So when you're talking about dosing, are you specifically for different types of cancer, whether it be breast, prostate, lung, or colon? Are you talking about microdosing with higher CBD strains, or are there any differences? Glioblastomas may be more of a THC dominant. How is that working?
So you see that greenhouse right there? We just got our processing license, and I'm going to be able to create the things that you just described in a microdose iteration. Currently, I only have access, it may or may not be legal, to that one iteration that I described. And all my patients get that free of charge because I can, and I've afforded that opportunity. And so I would love to be able to play around with it, especially with my prostate cancer patients, where now the literature is showing that THCA looks like it can be very valuable, and I'd like to be able to boost that up. What I do try to do is if they have access to things other than this, and we didn't even get to talk about terpenes. Something like having a beta-caryophyllene straw, something with terpenoline in it that's known to, help with apoptosis. I just don't have access to it, and the patients that I at guiding sadly don't either. But
Yeah.
yes, hold out, ready to do it.
Yeah, so I'm a practitioner here in Colorado, and we see a lot of patients coming in with a variety of different conditions, whether it be cancer or otherwise. And we have seen, even with larger doses, that people have responded well, and I know other practitioners around the country have. So I guess the key for me is we're seeing people who are looking for their one shot, and we've been getting some success with some higher doses. I'm not into the gram a day thing, but with some higher doses that have done remarkably well. So I'd be interested to see how the literature or how the studies come out, or the work that you're doing comes out with treating a variety of different types of cancers and what kind of response. Yeah, because we're seeing similar responses with our prostate cancer patients, even using higher doses and different formulations. And we have seen their PSAs going down. I'm not sure what the effect of testosterone was about, why the cannabinoids were causing that to decline the way it did, and the relationship between that and the cancer. But I'm really interested in your work, and I want to be in touch with you. So,
Thank you.
my name is Joe. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you, Joe. I have a question for you. When you treat these patients, how long do you treat them for as a maintenance? And then is it at the same dose?
So basically, when it comes to maintenance, when somebody's clear of their cancer, we don't like to take them off cannabinoids because there's been some evidence that you take them off and their cancer starts to come back again. So we go maybe to a lower dose. Maybe that's when I would want to go into more of a microdosing. I love microdosing. I think it has huge potential. But when we're treating cancer patients, it's hard to make that switch.
No, understood. But, I guess if my patients didn't respond, I would be, ratcheting it up, and maybe, they're self-selected and come to me for some reason and they end up responding, which is interesting. Are you concerned about, receptor downregulation?
Absolutely. This is why in our practice with receptor downregulation, you're talking about the biphasic effect, which you were showing on the slide. With the receptors downregulating, yeah, you may not have as much of a response. You still may have a response on the tumor without having as much response on the psychoactive aspects of the plant. So a lot of times we'll balance out the CBD with the THC because CBD will take care of some of the psychoactivity, so we can increase their dose of THC because we're adding CBD to it. A lot of play going on here and a lot of evidence that we need to learn about.
Right, for sure. When you look at that slide, and I don't know if you'll have access to these slides, you can, I don't care, but the Lugresti et al. Paper from 2006, and literally do the math and look at Avogadro's equation and look at the milligram dose, it ends up being very small amounts. Now granted, it's IC50, not apoptosis, but that was sort of my method of substantiating what I was doing.
Right. Well, thank you so much for all your work. This is really interesting stuff.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can't get out of my seat, but I do have a question from somebody who's watching on my phone. They're asking if your white matter is turning to fluid, would microdosing cannabis oil help?
If your white matter is turning to fluid, would dosing with cannabis oil help is the question.
Microdosing.
Would microdosing?
I wish that'd be great for me to know the answer. I have no idea. I guess that my gut reaction would be it probably could hurt. I mean, we know about neuroregeneration and creating new synapses and nerve connections. I can't imagine it hurting, but I don't know the answer to that.
Now, one thing that you talked about, Deb, though, is that you make sure each of your patients changes their diet and does. So I think the dietary changes are probably a big part of the effect, too.
She's talking about leukodystrophy.
Mm-hmm. Right, the white matter in the brain turning to...
Can we hear more about the diet changes?
Yeah.
Can we hear more about the diet changes, please?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually talk on whole food, plant-only diets, and I do that type of a diet for a bunch of different reasons, all of which is based in science. So the first thing is, as you you remember when we were in medical school, we learned that you can't pull a code until somebody's pH is normalized. And we also learned that, when your pH is in its acid range, our immune system doesn't work as well as when it's a pH either neutral or actually the sweet spot's about 7.2 to 7.4. So whole food, plant only, no added oils and no processed foods. When you do that, and people check their morning urines, their pHs for the most part are 7.2 to 7.4. And there are studies that show that you get immune improvement regarding it. Studies have shown that chemotherapy actually improves in some cancer cell lines. And recently there's a new study out there that says when a body pH is in an alkaline range, some cancers are actually more amenable to being treated with chemotherapy because they almost are like uncloaked. It's almost like an acid environment cloaks them and prevents the chemo from being able to eradicate it. The other thing is that when we change our diet from a whole food plant-based diet from a standard American diet, our microbiome changes. And if you look at the constellation of medical conditions that can be either adversely affected or it can be benefited from a proper microbiome, those conditions mirror the same conditions that most states allow for the recommendation of cannabis. And it's a huge overlap. And so I'm an anesthesiologist, and if doctors are punting these patients to me for cancer, they have a problem. And so I try to maximize their internal milieu as best as possible so that they are receptive to all therapeutic modalities, including cannabinoids.
Debra, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Nice to see you. Debra, can you talk about, a lot of people are using or calling me about CBD and derived from hemp products, and they're using that as opposed to cannabis, and because they don't want to be positive drug tested, or et cetera. And what's your experience with microdosing or the use of cannabis, CBD derived from hemp products?
So, I have zero experience of hemp-derived CBD, but I do have experience with cannabis-derived CBD as an isolate. In fact, I just ran a proof of concept study for pain management on CBD, low-dose CBD, plus 4 curated terpenes and a fatty acid amide in a rapidly dissolving sublingual tablet, and had an incredible response for mild to moderate pain relief. And now we're doing a multi-site study, right, Muffy, using a higher dose of CBD with fatty acid amide and 4 terpenes for pain relief as sort of like the entourage effect. I think that CBD by itself has a lot of medicinal properties, whether it be hemp-derived or cannabis-derived. It just has to be clean, because as we know that hemp plant is any cannabis plant is a bioaccumulator, and that's my major concern, is not just the extracted oil, but what else is being concentrated in that oil. So a lot of the hemp-derived stuff is not tested, at least not by an independent testing lab. And to me, that's my biggest concern when patients come and say I had a bad reaction. I don't know if that's to the hemp-derived CBD or the THC or the pesticides or anything else. Or does it have CBD in it at all? So in Maryland, any CBD product can be grown in Maryland, extracted in Maryland, and then sold in dispensaries in Maryland. So there is no hemp derived anything there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. What about THCA versus the carboxylated form? Can you just use THCA for this?
How about just using THC? I am a juice queen. I am a big fan of THCA, but everyone here is laughing about that. But it's true, and I've actually had my juice tested, and I will send you the results on what's actually in it. But what do you feel about THCA?
So I love the acid forms of all cannabinoids. I have a little mantra that says I don't like to exalt one cannabinoid and vilify another. I really do believe that the plant works best as a whole plant or an iteration thereof, especially for severe illness, but I love the acid forms. And it was interesting because I lectured at CanMed last year and talked about many of these studies and the microdose and half in the acid form and half in the decarb. Somebody raised their hand and said, well, why isn't it all activated? And my response is I don't know what that means because I think there's bioactivity in all of the cannabinoids. And then Dr. Meir, who followed me, showed a slide of cancer cells responding to, by apoptosis, to one iteration of a cultivar and not responding at all to another. It was the same cultivar. The only difference was the first one was THC-A, the acid form that actually created the apoptosis, and the THC, that same exact strain, did nothing. So everybody's different. I would love someday that we can take biopsies, throw them in petri dishes, and hit them with different strain varieties or cultivars of cannabis and or fractions, and see what works. That's my dream.
I agree. When I met with Shulam in March in Israel, that is exactly what he wants to study now is the acid forms. We had a long discussion on acid forms, and that's really his push now in studies is that. Cindy is next.
Okay, I have a patient question. I'm not a doctor. Hi. Have you done any how long-term studies have you done on maintenance doses on metastatic cancers? So I'm throwing you for two things now.
So my longest patients were from 2013, so that girl that was 8 years old is now 12.
Congratulations.
Yay! Thumbs up.
That's 40 years. I had a lung cancer patient that had 3 months to live, and she's here now, still alive, and the tumors they can't find. I have the prostate cancer gentleman from August 2016, who's still alive. So, 2 years in cannabis life is like, dog years, so what's that like?
Were they metastatic patients though? Meaning, it's more complicated.
Metastatic. The girl, the 8-year-old girl, was a left meningeal spread of her ALL, so that was metastatic. The lung cancer patients, both of them are metastatic. Breast cancer is metastatic, so yeah.
Good news.
There we go.
I'm dog ears.
You are.
Yes. Ask her what her stance is on hormone-positive breast cancers and high doses of THC.
What's your stance on hormone-positive breast cancers and high doses of THC?
I don't have a stance on high dose anything because my experience is with the microdose. I know that there are others like Mara Gordon or Anselmas that do the high dose and have great responses. I wish I said that I had the absolute information on all of it because then we'd cure cancer and we'd be talking about something else right now. So I don't have no experience personally.
Well, hormone cancers in general and even microdosing. You have what some doctors say, oh no, don't have any THC, and other people go, oh yes you can.
I think everybody's different.
Everybody's different.
You got to do what's right for you.
So my patients, you think that by inhalation, it would almost be like a topical, right? And I was really bringing my hands because they were sublingual and really aggressive forms of cancer. One person was a smoker, one was a non-smoker. Really, bringing my hands, my God, should I be having them vaporize or smoke? And then they both did really well with the diet change as well as the sublingual oil extracted form.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Kimless. We really appreciate you speaking to the group. We're all looking forward to seeing you in person in October at Marijuana for Medical Professionals.
I look forward to it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.